Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Rafae Iqbal, and in today's show we'll be deliberating on some very important topics that will unfold in the day to come. Of course, we'll be talking about Pakistan's upcoming budget and its prospects with the IMF bailout package. In that regards, we know that the budget is set to be presented in the Parliament on 12th of June, that is a Wednesday. And of course, in that regard, the chief whips of all the political parties have discussed the budget schedule and have held consultations regarding the upcoming budget that is to be presented in the Parliament. It's going to be a very important and a very crucial budget that as Pakistan aims to set the stage for the IMF bailout package with this budget for the fiscal year 2024 to 25. And of course, in that regards, the IMF has also recommended some suggestions to be included in the federal budget, and of course has emphasized for the reforms that the government of Pakistan needs to undertake for economic progress and prosperity, and to of course stabilize the country's economy and of course contribute to the economic growth as well. In that regards, the conditions set by IMF, they have highlighted an increase in gas and electricity prices and have also talked about a renegotiation of the NFC award. And of course, in that regards, Islamabad seeks to achieve a $6 to $8 billion IMF loan, and of course this loan will help stabilize the foreign exchange reserves of the country, as well as providing the resources for economic development in the certain sectors that the government aims to reform, and of course with that provide subsidies and facilitate the business and trading community of the country so that the industry can flourish, which can contribute to the tax revenue generation as well. The Finance Minister, Mohammad Aurangzeb, has also emphasized the need for tax reforms, and he has talked about tax reforms countless times. He has also talked about digitization of the tax structure of the country, and he said that these tax reforms are much needed to provide relief to the lower and middle income salaried class of the country. Of course, we know that the lower and middle income salaried class contributes a lot to the tax revenue generation, and the Finance Minister has highlighted providing them relief in this upcoming budget. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has also talked and has shown his determination and commitment to undertake these reforms that have been talked about in the upcoming budget. And of course, these reforms are very necessary and very crucial to stabilize Pakistan's economy and of course secure the IMF bailout package as well. These are the different, we'll be talking about the different aspects and scenarios regarding the upcoming budget, and of course the prospects with regards to the IMF bailout package. In the studios, we've been joined by senior analyst Farrukh Pitafi. Thank you for your time. On Skype, we have been joined by our guest, economic expert Mahmood. Khalid, thank you for your time as well, and Dr. Ali Salman, who is the Executive Director of Prime. Thank you both for your time and being a part of the conversation. I'll start our conversation from Mahmood Khalid and ask him about the upcoming budget. What do you think the key priorities or the focus areas are going to be for the government in regards to the IMF recommendations and in regards to the different sectors of Pakistan's economy that should be emphasized and prioritized?
And Dr. Saab, could you also add to this, because there are many variables whenever we are talking about economic growth. Today's decision of State Bank of Pakistan to cut interest rate, how exactly is it going to impact economy and of course the variables that define our budget in coming days?
Your question, I would start first because that's a very positive news for the economy as a whole, because whenever the State Bank is cutting its policy rate, it means two things. One is that the inflation expectations are going down. So that means that in future we are expecting the inflation to come down. The second good thing is that because of this high policy rate, our economic activities were kind of choked up. And we are expecting that with this good news, there is going to be some disruption in the current wave of kind of stagflation, and we would move towards a betterment in terms of economic growth. Now, on the first part, on what do we think about the budget upcoming? The budget is a kind of a financial outlay of the government's priority for the next fiscal year. Given the fact that there are lots of commitments in the budget which has to be met, for example, there are interest payments which has to be made. There are commitments in terms of projects which needs to be delivered, which we call as the throw forward. And there are certain recurrent expenditures which practically cannot be cut back. So given all these commitments, what is left for the government actually is to prioritize within the available resources. So what we are expecting is that if this year around, the government can kind of think out of the box, they can think that where necessary expenditures needs to be kept, and wherever they can create certain room of not spending or maybe shifting the spending towards a better way. By that, what I mean to say is that the public sector development program, which was announced close to 1 trillion last year, had to be cut because they didn't have enough resources, because the number of projects were very high. They had to actually roll back on certain initiatives. So that's a kind of a loss in terms of expenditures because you're not financing the required resources where it is needed. So what in terms of the budget we are expecting is that they have to cut back on certain commitments in terms of the expenditures. May it be the pension reforms for the new upcoming civil servants, may it be the commodity operations which has to be kind of curtailed in terms of the budgetary availability, may it be the circular debt which has to be at least, if not wiped out, some kind of stoppage or some kind of breaks needs to be applied. And within that, the tax actually is the prime area where the crux of the reforms would be. And the government is looking forward in terms of increasing the revenue by a lot. This is what we are really worried about as well, because when you're thinking about increasing the resources by such a big amount, that is only possible if you are going to disrupt the whole way the economy is working. I'm not saying that there are no untaxed sectors or there are gaps which need to be filled. But just think about it that you are going to take away a much financial resources from the ongoing businesses, and that is going to actually put brakes on their activities. And these activities are actually giving some kinds of jobs and some kinds of protection to the economic livelihood of the people. So we are looking forward for a very contractionary kind of a budget, and within that, there is going to be, relatively speaking, lesser ease, rather the difficulties are going to increase.
Right, Dr. Ali Salman, since we're talking about the cut in the monetary policy rate by 1.5%, how do you think the government can balance increasing trade? Because this reduction in the monetary policy rate is going to encourage and boost business and trade activities. How do you think the government can balance that with increasing the tax revenue generation at the same time?
Well, I think first of all, I also welcome this news. I think this was long awaited, and this was one of the perhaps the most recurring demand from the business community. To decrease the policy rate, particularly because the inflation outlook looks better. It is going considerably down, and as per the expectations. So this has been met, and I believe that this will induce additional investment. However, I think the second part is you mentioned about the revenue, and revenue generation depends on two things. First of all, the economic growth itself, how much business is going to contribute in job creation, in new investment. Both local companies and international companies, are they coming to Pakistan or not? And secondly, of course, the rates of the taxation itself. So these two factors influence the government capacity to increase the revenue. As far as the economic growth is concerned, we are still cautious about it. Because there are issues around the political stability of the country. There are also issues about the clarity about the IMF deal, when the details are going to be worked out, and also our external debt obligations, because that is still not fully funded, and so those are the macroeconomic risks which are there. So I think it is not going to be an easy task for the government to manage the growth expectation, and also to meet its own revenue forecasts or revenue targets. and therefore it needs to strike a balance. I am of the view, and this Mahmood is also was saying that we need probably to give a priority to economic growth, to for ease of doing businesses, and only that will propel the economy from this low growth trap to a high growth level, and then we can expect the businesses to produce profits, and hence that will translate into a higher level of taxes rather than increasing the tax rates. This should be the way forward.
Right, point very well taken, of course. And the SIFC is playing its role in trying to create an environment where it's ease of doing business. It's a investor-friendly environment. Farrukh Pitafi, what's your take on on how the current budget is going to set the stage for the IMF bailout loan package, and how important do you think it is going to be at the moment to address the reforms and the suggestions by the IMF and incorporate into the current budget to secure that loan?
Right. I thought that you're going to ask me whether I'm hopeful about the start of a new IMF program or not. But of course, what you ask is also very relevant. Look, first of all, let me also welcome this, slashing of a policy rate, because that was really stymieing the economic activity in the country. I hope in coming days we see the kind of activity that was needed for quite some time without the added cost of inflation. Regarding IMF, and of course there are certain other developments in the region, Rafae. Last time I was speaking on the subject of IMF negotiations, I said that I was very hopeful. I still am very hopeful that we are going to actually conduct the business well. Now, I wanted to actually refer to certain developments in the region, political changes that take place. India, which is one of the engines of growth in the region, was going through a very, very lengthy process of electoral, change or transformation. And that was also creating, that was sending all the regional economic indicators haywire. So now that government has taken over, it is the previous government with some added aspects. Well, let me also congratulate Prime Minister Modi on his assuming office. Now the good thing is that those atmospherics now settled down. IMF is also a part of those atmospherics, right? So our negotiations are going to resume very soon, and I'm sure that we are going to really have a headway. Regarding the demands that were there, certain sticking points. For example, let me also correct you. Earlier you said that IMF is asking for the increase in energy prices. Actually, that is not how it works. IMF actually looks at wherever you have deficit or you have a circular debt, and it demands that you take care of that problem. So what causes circular debt? Usually cost suppression. Wherever you are trying to control prices by one mean or the other, there you start incurring a lot of debt. So I think that that is important. We are going to take care of that. There was another demand that actually was presented by the media as a sticking point, and that was that the IMF is demanding increase in taxes on salaried class. I'm glad that my government actually stuck out its neck and said that we won't be doing that. So in coming days, what I foresee, Rafae, is that the negotiations once again will start. The budget will take care of most of the promises that we have made. But one bit that Ali Salman Sahab, I think, talked about was the political economy as well. Pakistan, of course, is battling with many destabilizing forces. So in that context, I am sure that IMF will also be flexible, because we have actually jumped through a lot of hoops to ensure that we are, IMF ready. So with that kind of situation in coming days, what we are going to see is some compromises on both sides, yet a good budget Of course, it is not going to be pro-growth. It can't be, because our economic problems are such that whenever you go for macroeconomic stabilization, whenever you go for fiscal belt tightening, what happens is that if economy doesn't shrink, it doesn't grow very rapidly. But that's all right. At this moment, what matters is righting the ship. Once you have righted the ship, stabilized the ship, you can work on growth numbers as well. Then, of course, I heard you actually talk about trade, or perhaps I thought that I heard
an increase in trade activity.
Yeah, increase trade activities. That bit about India, I hope in coming days, now that we have better understanding of each other and we have understood that our economic well-being is kind of connected. So why not actually work on that as well? I hope that in coming days we see better relations with all our neighbors, and that includes improved trade numbers as well.
Of course, in regards to that, Mahmood, Khalid, what's your take? Because the nation has been going through high inflation rates. They've been going through price increases in almost almost all of their basic amenities. With regards to that, how feasible do you think it is going to be for the government to fully implement the IMF prescribed measures, considering there could be a possibility of a public backlash as well? How do you see the government creating a balance between the two, and of course taking out and carrying its way forward with the budget as well?
And Dr. Khalid, I hope that we can begin to talk about the liabilities, major liabilities that we have. SOEs are one. Then pension reform is something that keeps coming up every time we talk about these matters. And finally, circular debt. Do you think that we have handle on all these issues as well?
Well, Pitafi, I would like to come back on your comment that the budget cannot be pro-growth even this time because of stabilization. We just completed our work on the tax commission, and we presented our recommendations, and Ali can second me on it because we were part of that exercise. If you can only think about some ways and means out of the box, don't think about simply doing the same thing repeated without any outcome, because that is not going to result into anything. Like, for example, taxation, increasing the tax rates, or simply kind of creating more distinctions in terms of filer, non-filer registration requirements is not going to actually solve our problem, whether it's stabilization requirement or others. We have to really think through that what actually is required for growth. And that is something which is even possible with tightening the belt, because you are spending, you're collecting in a better manner. So I'm sure that Ali can second me on what kind of proposals do we see there. Now, on your question in terms of how the IMF wishes can be actually balanced out in the budgetary proposals as well, the problem with that is that most of the times the IMF prescriptions are not taken into due consideration because there is no homework. Now, for example, as Pitafi has also mentioned, they are bothered about the overall figures in terms of the macro numbers, budget deficits, the trade deficits and others. If you can think about some good ways where the same thing can happen, but with better fiscal management, that is something which is required. And if that is not done, even in this budget, then we might see increasing taxes without pure reforms on the expenditure sides, which is actually the low hanging. And which has rightly been mentioned by Pitafi also, that there are key areas which need serious reforms. For example, pensions. If you combine the pension expenditures all across the governments, soon it is going to be the biggest expenditure after the interest payments. And right now it is close to 2 trillion rupees. Just think about it, that the running of the government is close to 500 billion, and we are paying 2 trillion rupees just for the sake of the welfare of the persons who have worked in the past. And that is only because of bad financial management. And the good thing is that at least the provinces are now considering this, and they are not going to offer any pensions for the incoming civil servants. Rather, they're going to pay upfront. And that is actually a better way of paying against your work efforts as well, because you are given the money right now rather than making you wait till the time when maybe it is not required by you by that time. And let the financial markets take care of it. On the second part of the state-owned enterprises, this is something which, even if the IMF doesn't say, this should be our home grown agenda, which we need to actually look into. If there are public sector enterprises, as per the triage report, which can be actually made good for the public, whether it is through the capital markets or through direct bidding, that should be done, and that should not be delayed. On the third part, in terms of having reforms on the other expenditures, such as even subsidies, why can't we set it in the form of some sunset clauses with some sort of performance guarantees rather than simply paying them out? So what we have to think really this time is that it should not be repeating the same mistakes by simply putting more money without thinking that whether it's going to give us value for that public money or not. Like, I give you a quick example. There is a lot of debate in terms of the Higher Education Commission budget being cut, because the federal government now thinks that the education is the responsibility of the provinces and actually they should be owning it. Now, why is that required? To me, because that is going to put pressure on the provincial governments to think about their educational strategies, how they want to grow their provincial economy by investing rightly in terms of areas which is required. Because when the federal government is actually financing something, whether it is through the NFC or through some vertical programs, the provinces take it for granted. They don't really care about that, for what purpose the money is being provided to them, and they simply spend it. So it is now high time that we create responsible budget by creating transparency, by creating accountability, and creating efficiency in terms of the money to be spent. And the principle should be that wherever the value for the public money is the highest, that is the end goal which should be achieved. And for that, even if somebody is unhappy, whether it's the elites or the businesses or even the politicians, the government should be ready for it, because that is something which is better for the economy in the long run. And this is what the NSE has approved today as well, because they have talked about the 13th five-year plan. So if we want to move towards a long-term planning, all that needs to be kept in mind rather than thinking for a single year only.
Right. Dr. Ali, just like Mahmood Khalid mentioned, transparency and better understanding of where the government is utilizing its resources. How do you think the current budget can ensure the transparency of government spending and the utilization of resources?
And connect that also with the question regarding PSDP. We know that there is some structural problem with how our PSDP and our ADPs are actually developed. So is there a possibility of creating some kind of mechanism to ensure that whatever money that is, earmarked can be utilized most optimally?
Well, I think as far as the transparency and accountability is concerned, we have, I think, two constitutional frameworks which are already there. One is called the Fiscal Responsibility and Debt Limitation Act 2005, and second is more recent, which is called Public Finance Management Act 2019. And in particular, the second one, this was introduced to encourage the governments, to convert the budget into a language which can be understood by citizens, and also to convert the budget out with the outputs. You see, the figures which are presented in each year, in each budget, can be meaningless if those figures are not associated with the goals. What are we going to achieve with allocation of, let's say, 100 billion rupees in terms of whether it particularly infrastructure project or other current needs. So transparency would be achieved if the government also presents information about these outputs. And this is one of the requirements and suggestions from the IMF and other lending agencies also, so that the budget can be better owned by the representative of the people and the public at large. So that's important.
Right.
Second aspect is you mentioned about the PSDP. Quickly, I'll mention. I think again, it is becoming very clear that most of the PSDP is not driven by economics, but most of it is driven by politics. And if you calculate the rate of return on many of these projects, unfortunately, the rate of return has become negative. So one very clear decision which the government, if they are serious about reform, is that they should not entertain any PHDP, any new PHDP projects if they are not financially viable in the long run. And the first preference of a resource allocation for development spending must be timely completion of existing projects. Mahmood will be able to correct me. There are about 1,500 projects or so out, in the pipeline.
Yeah.
10 trillion rupees through forward. And so, if you keep on dividing the limited amount of money in over a long time period, then the cost escalation is the only result that we are seeing, including, of course, the returns on these investments which are negative. So PSDP has become a drag. I think government should explore other avenues, including the public-private partnership, which can introduce some level of responsibility in financial planning and also ownership. I mean, there are so many examples in the world in which the local governments, the cities, are issuing their own bonds. It's not something new. It's had been there for decades, and the citizens can also own such local companies rather than a central government allocating funds, let's say in Lahore or Multan. So we should devolve many of these development spending to make sure that they are sustainable.
Right, absolutely. Dr. Ali Salman, you said something that actually piqued my interest. You were talking about rate of return of various projects that are developed. Can you help us understand and our audience how the government actually evaluates what exactly is the rate of return from various projects? What exactly is the measure to do it? You also spoke about PPP, public-private partnership, regarding PSTP. The biggest problem with that is that it sounds great, but you have to contend with our bureaucracy, which seems to be post-colonial, and then you have to remember the kind of practices, malpractices that might be in the market, so that might become an engine of corruption as well.
You see, as far as the public-private partnership is concerned, we have the adequate legislation in place, and we also have an agency called P3A, which is a part of the Planning Commission, which is already actually implementing. Few projects have started already, infrastructure projects in the same mode. So instead of financing the toll roads through the fiscal resources, they are doing it from long-term financing where the private capital is also involved, and this is happening as we speak, although the scale is limited. So we need to expand it, and we need to trust the private sector. We had similar experience in Pakistan Railways, but that was then that was confronted with a lot of legal challenges, and I think that needs to be addressed. So there are those challenges, but the models already exist. In terms of the the rate of returns on the PSDP, you see there is a very simple understanding in terms of cost-benefit analysis, that if we are going to incur resources through fiscal means on these projects, then they should be at least 1% rate of positive return on their investment. If we are spending, let's say, 100 million rupees on a railway upgradation project, then after the project is over, in a narrow amount of in a specific time period, the revenue from that project should be positive, and it should not be dependent on a continuous flow of the money to sustain itself from the government. So if a project fulfills that condition, even if it's long term, then it will be a net positive contributor to the economy. And if it is not, then I think government should really exercise a huge caution to bring it to reality. And by the way, Planning Commission does have mechanism in place, at least in terms of procedure, But how many times does it actually happen that those procedures are respected? That's a question mark. We hear often that a lot of time the prime minister directives overpower, these analysis at the planning commission, thus derailing the public's the efficient mechanism of PSDP.
What you're saying is we have plans, but we have to have execution as well. Over to you, Rafae.
Right, Mahmood, Khalid asking you how, since you mentioned and since we're talking about the upcoming budget, how important do you think the role of the small and medium enterprises is going to be? Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif was on his visit to China. The planning minister was accompanying him. And they praised the China model very much in regards to their economic success. Do you think the cottage industry model, specifically in regards to Pakistan's different sector, we see we have a sports industry in Sialkot, and Gujranwala we were establishing electronics parts different and assembling them as well. How important do you think the small and medium enterprises can play in facilitating and encouraging them in the economic revival of the country?
And Dr. Saab, could you also add to this one important aspect regarding startups? Last time in the budget, the government had allocated a substantial amount, not huge, but substantial amount to create a VC fund for startups in the country. Do you think that that is going to be further bolstered in this budget?
Well, I'll take the second question first again. You're very right, Pitafi, because venture capital is what is required for the startups. But unfortunately, our capital markets are actually not that much developed that they can sustain. If you look at the recent past, you would find hardly maybe one or two IPOs which has happened, because there is very less interest of the market in terms of owning the new projects. And for that kind of perspective, we really need to think about something which is beyond the venture capital, and maybe some kind of an incubation financial support needs to be provided. But having said that, there are examples in which the private sector has taken care of itself. For example, the IT sector. I'm sure everybody around this table knows that it's not purely because of the government support. They have evolved by themselves, because there was a complete network of the private financier which actually promoted this segment of exports and overall industry, which you can think about that as a kind of a small industry is there and substantially supporting. But you are very right that we need to think about some kind of incentive mechanisms which actually helps these startups, because if there is no risk coverage for the individuals which are investing in these venture capitals, or even the new upcoming ideas which the young generation is bringing out, and if there is no buying in, then it's not going to help grow out of this kind of low productivity trap in which the Pakistan is currently now. So this is something which is required. Now, on the other side, in terms of looking into the small and medium, let me add that it's not just the small and medium anymore. Now we have micro enterprises as well, because what has happened is that we have talked about it earlier, that because of kind of predatory tax regimes which we have in this country, the businesses don't want to grow. So all the businesses, major businesses, have now resorted to remaining small. And this is something which is actually helping the economy to sustain both the growth in the jobs as well as the domestic commerce. Remember that we have got a very high fertility rate, and this is, I think, one of the highest around the world. And there has to be some kind of an activity which can absorb these upcoming young labor force in the market. So this is the small and medium enterprises which are actually facilitating them in terms of providing the job. And they're also sustaining in terms of doing what is required for the domestic commerce. But having said that, if we really want to promote them, then we have to think about that what are kind of hurdles for them in terms of getting regularized. Because what happened is that these small enterprises don't get registered with the FBR because they fear they have to undertake the withholding taxes and so many other taxes. So they remain off the grid, and that actually leads them to not being able to get finances for their businesses, not being able to go for bigger export orders and these sort of things. So what the government really needs to think about is that some kind of a cluster-based ownership of these small and medium enterprises has to be there, and it has to be less regulatory, because the problem with the government is that whenever they think about some intervention, the only thing which comes in their mind is that let's create a new regulatory authority, let's try to supervise them. Instead of that kind of a approach, we have to think about facilitating approach in which there is least government. The sludge of the government, the footprint of the government needs to be reduced, and some kind of an ownership of that sector is required, because fortunately or unfortunately, that has been surviving our economy to date. And if we want to move forward,
Dr. Saab, I'm so glad that you're talking about these massive reforms that are needed. But is there a possibility also of creating a brain trust when it comes to SMEs or MSMEs, and particularly SMIDA? Because I remember when Mia Nawaz Sharif was Prime Minister of the country, at that time there was this youth finance scheme or loan scheme. And at that time, if you went to the, SMIDA's website, there most of the proposals that they offered for various people who might be able to enter into the market was either animal husbandry or, for that matter, dairy products and stuff like that, nothing beyond it. So do we need infusion of new thoughts and new thought leaders into SMIDA and bodies like that as well?
well, definitely, because if you look into the roles of these departments which were created with a mindset in terms of providing facilitation, but over time they have just been there to create reports, analytical reports, and they have not been able to perform. It's really the matter of leadership in terms of these organizations. Have you heard the SMIDA chairman talk about their vision? Has he been giving us some kind of a proposal that this is what he is here for about, and how can he make changes? We really don't know about the persons, and we really don't know that how they're working. So unlike instead of making them government jobs, we have to really make these organizations sustain and grow, because that is something which is required, and the whole sectors of the economy are linked with them. You are very right that we have to think about these institutions from what was their role and how they have been able to perform, and accordingly make changes in their HR structure, in their financing strategies, in terms of their ownership and others. To date, whatever the interventions the SMIDA has been doing is mostly of kind of reporting, connecting the information from one place to the other, rather than thinking that how they can move forward in terms of graduating these small businesses into bigger businesses. And for that, as Ali has earlier mentioned, that the transparency and accountability framework has to be there for these institutions as well. What were the key progress indicators which were set for them, and how good they have been in terms of achieving them? And once there is some performance pressure on these organizations, then automatically the leadership and the organizations are going to start to deliver on it.
Right. Of course, these are the different aspects that we'll obviously be discussing in the next days to come as well. Of course, this is the upcoming budget of Pakistan. Yeah. A lot of prospects regarding the IMF bailout package as well, and the reforms. That's all we can hear regarding the upcoming budget, and innovation out of the box solutions. These are the solutions that the government should be focusing on with regards to the budget, upcoming budget, and of course the negotiations with the IMF that will unfold in the days to come. Unfortunately, we're short on time. I'd like to thank both of our guests, Mahmood, Khalid, the economic expert, and Dr. Ali Salman, who is the Executive Director of Prime. Thank you both for your time and being part of the show. Farrukh Pitafi, Senior Analyst, thank you for being part of the show and being in the studios with us as well. That will wrap up today's episode. See you same time tomorrow, and we'll talk about the developments that unfold tomorrow and in the days to come. Take care.